When we look at an event like the Minnesota attack, the instinct of the human mind is to focus only on what can be seen. We look for the visible causes, the motives, the personal grievances, the social or political triggers. We analyze the psychology of the attacker, the failures of security, the breakdown of systems. And all of these things matter, but they are not the whole picture. They are surface explanations. Beneath them lies something far deeper, something darker, something unseen. Scripture tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. In other words, what appears on the surface as a purely human act of violence is, at its root, connected to spiritual realities. The visible world is not separate from the invisible, it is shaped by it. What begins in the unseen realm manifests in the physical, and until we understand that, we will always misread the true nature of what is happening. Psychologically, when people lose their sense of grounding, when they are disconnected from meaning, they become vulnerable to forces beyond themselves. Rage, hatred, despair, these emotions do not simply emerge in isolation. They are amplified, magnified, and often manipulated by currents they do not even recognize. An individual may think he is acting out of his own will, but he is being swept along by tides far greater than himself. That is why violence so often feels irrational, disproportionate, almost otherworldly, because it is not just the individual who is acting. Something is working through him. Philosophically, this forces us to confront a truth our modern age has tried to deny, that evil is real, and it is active. We live in a culture that wants to explain everything by psychology, by sociology, by economics. And while those disciplines reveal part of the story, they cannot explain the whole. They cannot explain why human beings commit atrocities that go beyond logic, why violence erupts with a ferocity that seems almost demonic, why entire cultures can descend into madness. To understand that, we must acknowledge the reality of the unseen. The Minnesota attack, then, is not just an isolated act of brutality. It is a symptom of a larger battle. It reveals that behind the visible struggles of our age, political division, moral confusion, cultural decay, there are darker currents at work. And those currents are not passive. They are seeking to infiltrate minds, to corrupt hearts, to turn human beings against one another, and ultimately against God. So if we want to respond to what happened, we must look deeper. It is not enough to treat the wound while ignoring the infection. It is not enough to condemn the act without discerning the forces that fueled it. The battle is not only on the streets, it is in the spirit. And here is the truth we must face. If we fight only the visible, we will lose. But if we recognize the unseen and stand against it, we will not only understand what happened in Minnesota, we will know how to resist what is yet to come. When we ask why events like the Minnesota attack happen, we cannot avoid looking at the larger culture that surrounds them. A single act of violence never arises in isolation. It grows in soil that has been prepared long before. And one of the most defining features of our modern world is that it has systematically removed God from its foundations. We have taken the sacred out of education, out of public life, out of morality, and even out of identity itself. Yet what we forget is that when you remove God, you do not create neutrality, you create a vacuum. And vacuums never remain empty. Psychologically, the human soul is not designed to exist without meaning. People cannot live long in a void. If faith is taken away, something else will rush in to take its place. If we deny God, we do not live in freedom from belief. We live in captivity to lesser gods. Into the emptiness come ideologies, obsessions, hatreds, addictions. The heart that was made to be filled with the presence of the divine becomes filled with forces that distort, divide, and destroy. And the more a culture distances itself from God, the more it multiplies the very darkness it claims to escape. Philosophically, this points to one of the oldest truths in history. No civilization can survive without a transcendent foundation. Rome collapsed not only because of invasions, but because it lost its moral and spiritual center. Societies rise when they are aligned with higher meaning, and they crumble when they sever themselves from it. Our modern age believes it can build a lasting order on materialism, on pleasure, on technology. But all of these are temporary. They cannot satisfy the deepest hunger of the soul. They cannot restrain evil, nor can they produce goodness. At best, they distract. At worst, they amplify the emptiness. This is the cultural condition that produces attacks like the one in Minnesota. We see the violence, the confusion, the fragmentation, but behind them lies a deeper absence. When a society teaches its people that there is no ultimate truth, no higher law, no eternal accountability, then the door is left wide open for chaos. Because once nothing is sacred, everything is permissible. And when everything is permissible, violence ceases to be unthinkable. It becomes inevitable. The attack, then, is not only the act of an individual. It is a mirror held up to the culture. It shows us what happens when God is removed and nothing is put in his place but ideology, rage, and emptiness. It is the fruit of the vacuum. And so the lesson is clear. If we want to stop the darkness, we cannot simply restrain it with laws or programs. We must fill the vacuum. We must return to the source of meaning, the one who alone can fill the soul, the only foundation strong enough to hold a life, a nation, and a world. Because in the end, emptiness always gets filled. The question is, what will we choose to fill it with? If the vacuum of meaning creates the soil, then the next question is, what seeds are being planted in that soil? Because a vacuum alone does not guarantee destruction. It becomes dangerous when it is filled with voices, forces, and influences that shape the way people think and feel. And in our time, the manipulation of the human mind and heart has become one of the greatest unseen weapons. We live in an age where people imagine themselves free because they can choose what to watch, what to read, what to believe. But the truth is, most of those choices are already shaped long before they are made. Ideologies saturate education, narratives saturate media, images saturate entertainment, and algorithms curate what we see until our very perception of reality is filtered. The result is that people are not thinking freely. They are being programmed. Their emotions are stirred, their fears magnified, their hatreds inflamed, often without them even realizing it. Psychologically, this is powerful because the human mind is deeply suggestible. We are influenced by repetition, by imagery, by group pressure. When lies are repeated often enough, they begin to feel like truth. When outrage is normalized, it begins to feel like justice. When violence is justified in words, it eventually finds its way into actions. And those who are most vulnerable, the broken, the isolated, the unstable, become fertile ground for dark ideas to take root. Philosophically, this raises the question of free will itself. If our perceptions are manipulated, if our desires are being shaped by forces outside ourselves, how free are we? The danger is not just that individuals are missiled, but that entire cultures can be steered toward destruction while believing they are choosing it freely. History has shown this again and again. The propaganda of empires, the indoctrination of movements, the seductions of false ideologies, they always promise liberation, but they end in bondage. So when we look at something like the Minnesota attack, we must ask what was speaking into that individual's life. What messages shaped his thoughts? What narratives fed his anger? What voices gave him permission to cross the line from thought into action? Because violence rarely begins in the hand. It begins in the mind. And the mind is where the battle is being fought every day. That is why it is not enough to treat violence as an isolated problem. It is a symptom of a deeper system of manipulation. If you poison the stream at its source, it doesn't matter how many filters you put downstream, the water will still be toxic. In the same way, if the voices shaping our culture are poisoned, then the acts that emerge from that culture will also be poisoned. This is why discernment is so critical in our time. We must learn to recognize when we are being manipulated, when our emotions are being hijacked, when our thoughts are being steered. Only by guarding the mind and heart can we resist the currents that are sweeping so many into darkness. And here is the truth to carry with you: whoever shapes your mind will shape your life. So choose carefully who you allow to speak into it. If we accept that behind the violence we see our unseen forces, if we acknowledge that the vacuum of culture creates fertile ground, and if we recognize that minds and hearts are being manipulated, then the question becomes, what do we do? How do we respond when the darkness is not only around us, but pressing into the very structures of our world? The answer is not despair. The answer is discernment and resistance. Discernment is the ability to see beyond the surface. Most people stop at appearances. They look at the news and see only events. They hear rhetoric and assume it is truth. They feel emotions and assume those emotions are their own. But discernment looks deeper. It asks, what is behind this? What spirit is animating it? What direction is it pushing? Without discernment, we become passive consumers of whatever narrative is fed to us. With discernment, we become awake, able to test the spirits, able to recognize when something is counterfeit, no matter how polished it appears. Psychologically, discernment is critical because human beings are naturally reactive. We are moved by emotion before reason, by impulse before reflection. Discernment interrupts that cycle. It creates space between stimulus and response. It allows us to ask, is this true? Is this good? Where does this lead? Without that pause, people are swept up in outrage, in fear, in hatred, exactly the emotions the darker forces want to inflame. Discernment is not just spiritual, it is profoundly psychological. It keeps us from being enslaved by the manipulations of others. But discernment alone is not enough. Once we see, we must resist. Resistance does not always look like protest or confrontation. Sometimes it is as simple as refusing to believe the lie, refusing to be swept into the rage, refusing to let darkness dictate the condition of your soul. Philosophically, resistance is the affirmation of free will, the refusal to surrender the mind and heart to powers that seek control. It is the decision to live by truth even when falsehood is louder, even when deception is easier, even when compromise is safer. Resistance also requires courage, because the moment you step out of the stream, the current will push against you. Culture rewards conformity and punishes those who question. But history shows that transformation never begins with the masses. It begins with the few who dare to see differently, who dare to stand apart, who refuse to bow to the idols of their age. Resistance is costly, but passivity is fatal. So when we look at the Minnesota attack, we must see it not only as a tragedy to grieve, but as a wake-up call. It calls us to sharpen our vision, to open our eyes, to discern what is moving in our culture, and to resist the forces that would drag us into the same darkness. And here is the truth to take with you. You cannot resist what you do not discern, and you cannot overcome what you are unwilling to confront. The time to discern is now. The time to resist is now.